All right, welcome to Unit 5. This is our first lesson. Unit 5 is all about graphs. So our first lesson is going to be about circle graphs. This is some just like info about circle graphs, so if you want to read it. Essentially, a circle graph is something that looks like these two things right here. These aren't good representations of circle graphs. It's actually two problems with circle graphs. But what circle graphs do is they take a circle and they divvy up that circle into sections. And then those sections represent how much of something you have. And it always comes down to a percentage. So if you look at this one on the right, they're saying this section represents 20% of something. The reason these two circle graphs aren't good examples is because this first circle graph has way too many sections. Like it's been broken up into so many things, it's hard to really see how much stuff is really going on. So circle graphs are typically for when you only have a few sections of data or information that you want to work with. The second circle is not a good example because all the sections are pretty much the same size. And the idea of a circle graph is to be able to easily look at it and be like, oh, that percentage is the biggest, that percentage is the second biggest, and so on and so forth. When all the percentages are very close to each other, like 20, 22, 18, 25, and 15, the circle is just kind of broken up in equal sections, and it's too hard to say which section is the biggest. Cool. Let's just do some questions because that's the best way to do this. So this is a circle graph right here. This circle graph represents pets of students in Mr. Wong's class. So when you see this pattern, that represents the dog section. When you see this pattern, it represents the cat section. This pattern represents the bird section, and this pattern represents all other animals. So if you're looking, it's pretty clear to tell that the biggest section is definitely this section right here, which is the same pattern as our dogs. So if someone was to just quickly ask me, like, what is the most popular pet to have in Mr. Wong's class, you could just look at it and say dogs. That's why we like having circle graphs. They're very easy to look at and quickly get some information. On the left here, we're just going to answer some quick questions. It says, what percentage of the class has a dog for a pet? All right, well, this pattern represents dog. That means this section right here is our dog section, and it is 40%. That means 40% of the kids in Mr. Wong's class have a dog. Question B, how many students have dogs? Okay, so if you look back at our information, they told us that the circle graph shows the type of pets of 30 students. So if we're saying 40% have dogs, then to go 0.4 times 30 would tell you how many of these people have dogs as pets. The way I got 0.4, that's what 40% as a decimal is, right? So 0.4 times 30 means 12 kids had dogs. The last question, how many students have cats? Cats is this one right here, which would be this pattern. It says 30% have cats. They asked how many though, so we have to go 30% as a decimal, 0.3, times the 30 kids that are in the class. And if you do that, you should get, I think it's 10, you get 9. Good thing I put in my calculator, I would have got that wrong. 9 kids have cats. Cool. That's like the basics of a circle graph. Oh, there's one more question here. How many students have birds? So birds was this right here, which it didn't give us the percentage. So what we have to do is we have to find what that percentage is. The way we're going to find that missing percentage is by realizing that this entire circle equals 100%. So if you subtracted all the other percentages you did have, we're going to subtract the 30% of cats, the 40% of dogs, and the 10% of other, that will tell me my missing percentage that I have over there, which is 20%. So that means this missing percentage for birds is 20%. The question now says how many students have birds? Well, we're going to take the 0.2 for 20%, multiply that by 30, and you should get 6 students have birds. or 20%. Cool. Here's another circle graph. It's about Omar's day. So you can see Omar's day is broken up into a few categories here. We have homework, we have recreation or fun, we have school time, we have sleeping, and we have eating. The first question says, how many hours does he spend sleeping? So if we look at his categories, sleeping is the one that is all checkered like this. Well, it's kind of hard to tell, isn't it? I'm going to say that. I think that's the sleeping pattern. It didn't come out. It didn't print off very well. We're going to go with that's our sleeping one. It's kind of like the checkered one. So 20% of his day is spent. You know what? I don't think that's right. I think it's this one over here. The more I'm looking at those patterns, I think this looks more like that. Anyways, we're going to go with that one. So he spends 35% of his day sleeping. To figure out how many hours that actually is, you take 0.35, which represents the percentage, and you times it by 24 hours in a day, and you will get how many hours he is spending sleeping, which is approximately 8.4 hours a day. So I took the percentage, I changed it to a decimal, and then I multiplied it by 24 hours a day. So for B, when it says how many hours does he spend in school a day, school is this one, which I think is this empty brick one. How many hours? Well, it's 30% of his day, so 30% is a decimal, 0.3. We times that by the 24 hours in a day, and we go 0.3 times 24 is 7.2 hours a day in school. Awesome. We got another one right here. Might be good to just pause and see if you can do the question on your own. If you want to take a second. I'll write it out. So it says, this circle graph shows the age of viewers of a TV show. 1 week, approximately 250,000 viewers tuned in. Which two age groups together make up half of the viewers? So if I look at my my circle, I'm looking for half my circle. If I looked at this, that means I'm splitting the circle in half like that. And I can see that these two groups combined would give me half. So for us, we're going to say that our viewership is this like checkered pattern, which I'm going to say is 13 to 19 is this one. And then 0 to 12 is this one. So which two age groups together make up half? It'd be from 0 to 12 and 13 to 19. That means half of the viewers are from age 0 to age 19. Awesome. Part B. How many viewers are in 0 to 12 group? Well, the 0 to 12 group is that one I've left shaded in the blue. And it tells me that that's 5%. So I change that percent into a decimal, which is 0.05. If you're not sure how I'm doing that, I'm just dividing the percentage by 100. Right? 5% divided by 100 gives me my decimal. That's how I'm getting these decimals. Then I multiply by how many people were in the circle, which is times 250,000 people. And that will spit out your answer of how many people were watching TV between the ages of 0 and 12, which is 12,500 viewers. Fantastic. Number 4. It says 80 vehicles were sold at a dealership in 1 week. The circle graph shows the type of vehicle sold. How many more minivans were sold than SUVs? So they're asking how many more minivans. So I got to figure out the number of minivans. Well, minivans is this checkered, which is this right here. And there's 45% of them. So if I want to figure out the number of minivans, it's 0.45 multiplied by the 80 vehicles that are in the circle in the information total. I go 0.45 times 80. I get 36 vehicles or minivans. I then want to find my SUVs. My SUVs is this one, which is 30%. 0.3 times 80 will tell me how many SUVs I had, and I get 24. If I want to figure out how many more minivans there were than SUVs, I would go 36 minus 24 to get my answer of 12 more minivans than SUVs were sold. All right. So that should be pretty much the basics of reading circle graphs. We're going to get into making them a little bit. The way that you make these circle graphs is by taking surveys and then trying to turn those surveys into percentages. So here we have Sarah surveys all the grade 7s to determine their favorite choice of activity for the year-end field trip. Her results are shown below. Okay, so we've got bowling, beach picnic, inline skating, and movie. We need to turn those into percentages. So it's telling me that 18 students went bowling. But what is that as a percentage? And the way you're going to figure that out is by making sure at the bottom of your charts or of your surveys, you always have a total. So if I went in and I added up all the students and I went 18 plus 36 plus 12 plus 6, so 18 plus 36 plus 12 plus 6, that means the total number of students in this class was 72. And if I want to figure out the percentage of students that want to go bowling, I have to do 18 divided by 72. And that will give me my percentage as a decimal, which we then can change to be a percentage. So 18 divided by 72 gives me 0.25, which is 25%. And again, I can do that for everything. So I can divide this by 72 to get 50%. I can divide this by 72 to get 0, we're going to say 17%. You're going to round it, right? So my answer is 0.16 repeated, which we're going to round to be 17%. And then this, if you divide by 72, would give you a percentage of 8%. And if you do this properly, then you should be able to add up your percentages, and the total percentage should always be 100% because that's everything in the survey. And if you go 25 plus 50 plus 17 plus 8, it does in fact equal 100%. So that's how these things are actually getting made, right? They're taking surveys and then they're turning those surveys and that data into percentages, and then they're making each percent of the circle match up. So for instance, for bowling, I need to take up 25% of the circle, which is a quarter of my circle. So that's 25%. They then had my inline skating as 50%. That should be half my circle, which that is half my circle, 50%. 17% and 8% are hard. 17% should be a little bit less than a quarter. So you can see that section is a little bit less, and that represents our 17%. And then 8% should be about half of that. So if I'm thinking about half of 17, it'd be a little sliver like that. That's 8%. And that's how they're turning this information into circle graphs. Cool. We have another one here. Let's see if we can do it. It says a 300-gram container of yogurt contains 28 grams of water, 54 grams of carbs, 12 grams of protein, and 6 grams of fat. Complete the chart below. Okay, let's complete this chart. We're looking for grams of water. So it told me there was 228 grams of water. It then told me there was 54 grams of carbs. So this would be 54. It then said 12 grams of protein. So this should be 12. And lastly was 6 grams of fat. This should be 6. And I like to just tag on my little total at the bottom. And it did tell me the total already. It's 300. It told me up here, but if you added it all up, it would equal 300 as well. Awesome. To find the percentages, you're going to take those numbers and divide by the total. So if you went 228 and you divided by 300, it would tell you that this is 76%. If you did 54 divided by 300, you're going to get 18%. And these percentages are what allow us to be graphing things on a circle graph. 12 divided by 300 is 4%. And 6 divided by 300 is 2%. And in total, you have 100%. Cool. You then can graph these things. Water takes up 76%, so that should be a little bit more than 3/4 of your graph. So this water right here would be 76%. That's 3/4 of my graph, the big chunk. My next one is my carbs is 18%. This section right here. And then I have a little tiny sliver here for protein, which is 4%. And then an even smaller sliver here for 2%. And in total, I have 100% of my circle filled in. Cool. We're going to try drawing it. So they gave us this question right here. They already filled it all out for us. They took the votes, they turned it into percentages, and then we're just going to try to put it in this circle right here. And I'm going to show you how you draw this. So when you have a circle, I like to think of it in quarters. So if you were to take a circle and if you were to break it into quarters, so like this, each quarter is 25%. Right? So this gives me 25% in this section. This is another 25%. This is another 25%. And this is another 25%. And if I always kind of think of that, then I can kind of estimate everything else from there. So for instance, when this first thing says it's 36%, okay, well, I know 36% is going to be about 1/4, right? So it's going to be this whole quarter here. And then it's going to be another 11, which should be about half of this next quarter, right? Because this quarter, if you were to split it in half and draw another line through here, that would turn that 25% into 12%, right? That little section, 12.5. So I'm going to estimate that if I wanted to get 36%, I would have to have from here to about here. I'm going to estimate that's about 36%. And it is just an estimation, right? But it's a pretty close estimation. And it's very important that you label things so that I know what you're talking about. This is my 36% for the Science Center. So I'm just going to put SC for Science Center. Then they tell me I have 32% for the zoo. Well, if I look at how big that chunk is I just did for 36%, 32% should be a little bit less than that. Okay, so my next percentage, if I'm thinking about it, should be not quite as big as that section. So I'm going to draw to about here. And I'm going to just estimate that that is 32% for the zoo. If I then look at the next section, it's 16%, which is half of the zoo. So if my zoo was this big, I need a section that would be about half as big. So I would say that's about to there. And that would be about half the size of that red one. right? I'm just estimating, but I mean, I'm doing good estimations. This would be 16%. And my last chunk is also another 16%. So again, I should be having the same size piece of pie as the blue one. And that is how I divvy up a circle and make my circle graphs. If you look over here, they have a proper one laid out. And I mean, we're pretty darn close just by our estimations. Like, it looks pretty similar to the official one they gave us over there. Again, I did all that by estimating by quarters, right? I broke everything up into quarters and then kind of went a little bit more, a little bit less. Cool. We got one question left where we're going to build a circle diagram together. So we got this guy right here. My circle's off my page for some reason, but that's okay. It's John monthly expenses. And this is a good thing, actually. When you guys get into online banking and stuff, I know I'm with RBC. It actually tells me, and it gives me a circle pie chart, and it says this is what you spend your money on. So it tells me the percentage I'm spending my money on. It's kind of crazy. To be able to do everything, you have to have a total, right? So you can see we have a bunch of information. We have our student loans, we have our rent and our food, we have clothing, we have car, we have savings, but we need to total all that up to get this down here, because that's the only way we're going to find our percentages. So if we added that up, we have 600 plus 1,050 plus 450 plus 600 plus 300. Our total expenses is 3,000 for the month. We're then going to convert all this into percentages. The way we do that is by going whatever the amount was, so 600, and dividing it by 3,000. That would give you a decimal number. That decimal number is 0.2, which means 20%. We can do this again. So for rent, as a fraction, it would be 1050 divided by 3,000, which is the total. And you get 0.35, which we know as a percentage is 35%. Our entertainment we have over here. So if we want to do our entertainment, it would be 450 divided by 3,000. And that's 0.15, which we know is 15%. My car expenses, 600, we're going to go 600 divided by 3,000. And that gives me 0.2. Oh, I already did that one, which is 20%. And my last one is going to be 300 for my savings divided by my 3,000. You put that in your calculator, you get 0.1, which is 10%. And again, if you totaled all that up, your percentages would all add up to be 100%. If I wanted to put this on a chart, on a circle, I'd like to picture things as quarters, right? I know that this would represent 25%. So the very first thing I want to do is my student loans, which is 20%. So that means I want to be less than a quarter. I want to be about there. That represents 20% for my student loan. My next one is my rent, which is 35%. I also know that if I were to add these two things up, 20% plus 35% is 55%. So on my pie chart, those two things should go just past half to give me my 30% is over here. And that is for my rent and food. And I estimated that 30% by realizing, 35%, not 30%. By realizing that just those two items together, if I added them up, should be 55%. That's over half of my budget on those two things. I then have clothing. My clothing is 15%. So if I'm just trying to estimate, 15% should be smaller section than my 20% up there. So I'm going to guess it's about there for 15%. And that's for my clothing and entertainment. I then have a car that's 20% of my budget, so that should be bigger than my 15. So I'm going to go about there and say that's 20% for my car expenses. And my last one is my savings, which is 10%, should be the smallest sliver, which is right there. If I looked at that, I feel like I made maybe my 15% a little bit too big. But that's my 15% for my savings. Yeah, if I could redo that, I would make this yellow line a little bit bigger. I do it like that. There we go. That's a little bit better. Awesome. And that's how we could turn a survey into a circle chart, or circle graph. Just an FYI, at the end of this unit, we're not going to have a test. What we're going to do is we're going to do a project where we're going to have to build all these different graphs from surveys. So you will have to build a circle graph at the end for a project. Cool. The reason we do circle graphs is it's easy to look at something and know where you're spending your money. If I look at this, it's like, oh, okay, I know I'm not spending very much on savings. I'm spending a lot on my car loans, my student loans, and my rent, especially my rent and food is the biggest one, right? It's easy to see that because the section is broken up. Wonderful. Take care. I'll see you all soon, hopefully.